Hey y'all, thank you so much for tuning in. If this is your first time, I'm Matt, and I run this channel, Improv and D&D, where I focus on using improv skills to help improve roleplay in TTRPGs. Now, tonight, well, I'll start things off with for everyone in America or Americans who happen to be abroad who still celebrate Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving. I celebrated last night with my family and it was delightful. Um, had a little bit of like grilled meat, some hot pot, too much food. I'd say like most of the foods that we had probably aren't super traditional Thanksgiving foods. They're not like mashed potatoes or turkey or anything, which I love, don't get me wrong, but it's not exactly our forte. And so instead, we had some beef, we had some pot stickers, we had some like just these pork strips that my mom marinated. Incredible. We also had this like it's like a I don't really know what to call it. They're like a shellfish with an enormous shell, barely any meat, but delicious, and we didn't have to pay for it, so that's always a plus. My dad, one of his clients, just happened to have some and wanted to give some to us for like the holidays, which was very, very nice. So big shout out to them. Thank them very much. But yeah, today we're going to be focusing on something that is very near and dear to my heart. Well, a little bit of wrestling. Not like, Olympic wrestling, but professional wrestling in the veins of, nowadays, WWE, AEW, New Japan, all that jazz. But I'll start things off just by saying like what it means to me, because I get it. Like, for I guess if you want to keep the magic alive, then I would stop right now and say, hey, maybe watch the next one. But I am gonna be for anyone who isn't aware of the truths behind wrestling, then please steer away. But I'm gonna reveal in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Of course, wrestling is scripted. It's planned. I'm not gonna say fake necessarily. Like if you're putting money on matches, then it's like it's not exactly the same sort of competition that we would expect, right? As far as like combat is concerned, it's a story. If you're into theater, then you could think of it kind of like watching a play or watching a movie where people are fighting, they're throwing each other around, they're doing crazy things with their bodies for entertainment, for storyline. And for me, I started watching when I was a kid. I remember turning on, like, I didn't even know what was on until I was flipping through the channels. And I happened upon, I think it was UPN at the time, and they just happened to be running WWF SmackDown right then. And it was such a blast. It was so cool to be able to watch. I think at that point it was like The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin. To watch these guys yell at each other and punch each other and throw each other around, I loved it. I believed in it back then too. Like, I believed in the storylines, I believed in the characters, and I would try it. I didn't have other friends that I knew of that liked it, And so I would go over to my parents' room because they had a big bed as opposed to my little twin one. And I'd grab my teddy bear, the one that was like the biggest one, which is like maybe 2 feet tall-ish. But I would just start doing moves on it. And doing things like the rock bottom or like the frog splash, which is where you jump off the corner and just land on someone. But I was doing that with my teddy bear, and that's why my parents' bed was destroyed. I remember there was one time where I just heard this sharp screech of metal because apparently I landed so hard that one of the box springs like popped out. So thankfully I'm okay with that, but professional wrestling is very near and dear to my heart, is what I'm trying to say. But we can use this to inform our improv and our play at the D&D table. And I'm gonna turn us over to the trusty Google Sheets, where I love to go through some notes, go through some ideas. And if you want to follow along, I've left a link in the description, but of course you can see it on the screen too. I'll leave that link up in case you want to refer back to it. But there's just some very key elements of wrestling that you can use to maybe shift mindset or shift your play completely in tabletop role-playing games. Oh, and I mentioned here like specifically DM tips, but there are plenty of player tips too. At least as far as I'm concerned. The first thing I want to mention is the idea of sharing focus, because in wrestling, when people are getting heated, I mean, most of the time you think to one of those backstage segments, or you think to people doing promos in the ring, it's like talk, fight. But it reaches a boiling point before we get there. And while they're working through that, while they're building that, they're sharing focus. So the two people they each have microphones, and they're able to communicate to each other. They're able to call each other out, play to the crowd, and essentially build up the tension until we reach that breaking point. And once we've reached that, then we can start fighting. Then we can start wrestling and throwing each other around. But they know to share. They know to allow each other the spotlight so that you can build together. Because you could have one person just on the mic, just going hog wild on the other person. I mean, there are plenty of segments like that if you watch wrestling. But there are plenty of times where it's like, because it's planned, because you're able to figure out like, okay, it's this person's moment, you give up the focus. And I mean, there are plenty of times in games where it's like, sure, I feel like I want to step in. This feels like such a juicy moment. This feels like such a powerful moment. But in spite of that, sometimes you just have to stand aside. You just have to stay in the background for a little bit because it's not your time. Case in point, there was one scene in particular in a game in Tabletop Treasure Hunters, which is on Level 1 Geek. You should check them out if you haven't. They're on Twitch. Absolute phenomenal. They got me started in all this, so I'm eternally thankful to them. Specifically Tori. She is wonderful. But speaking of Tori, in that session, what happened was her character, Teal, was diving on a dragon after the object of her character's affections. And he had dove off this airship to try to get an object that she needed for a quest, but he dove off without any thought of his own safety. And so then my character was there for backup, just flying down just to make sure, because I had a plan. But when they made their rolls were successful, in which case it was narrative control. And in that moment, Chase, because he's a fantastic DM, put it to me, asked me, what is my character, what was your character doing, Matt? And I said, you know what? This is all theirs. And I just stepped aside because in that moment I knew that that was an important time for those two. And so I had to take that step back so that they could have a very, very powerful character developing moment. Now, I'll make a note here. Give it up when there's something important going on. Don't want too much dilution. Now, I'm gonna shift gears now because I think in most of the games that I've played, there may be one player or two who are more inclined to take focus and are less apt to give it up. But majority of players have the wherewithal to say, hey, it's not my moment, so you got this. And they want to make sure everyone's voices are heard. Like, majority can give focus. And that's fantastic, because that's very, I think of it as being very teamwork oriented. That's great. But I do also want to emphasize that in wrestling and at the table, sometimes you have to be able to step up and take focus. And by that, I mean, there will be times where, you might not necessarily want to have the spotlight, but sometimes you have to take it. Sometimes based on maybe the moment may demand you take focus. Center stage. And how do you know when that's the case? You play it by ear, but you have to take risks if you're not sure. Play it by ear. Be willing to take risks if you're not sure. But a good rule of thumb, at the table at least, is that if your character should be speaking up right now, but isn't, then why aren't they? Now, if in that moment your character has it makes sense for them to speak up, but you're not doing it, then it's a matter of thinking, does this make sense for the character? Because if it does, then by all means. But if it doesn't, then go ahead and take focus. Go ahead and say what your character would want to say. Because oftentimes when we think of taking focus, the fear is that we're like hogging the stage, upstaging people, or being attention seeking. And I mean that may be a fear, right? When I used to play basketball, one of the things that I was afraid of was being called a ball hog. And so oftentimes in games where I know I can make the shot, but because I was afraid of that label, I'd give up the ball. And that isn't great, because sometimes you have to be the one to take the shot. sometimes you have to be the one to step up. And at the table, sometimes you have to step up and do your part in the scene. So in this case, I mean, when you take focus, of course, it gives you character development, because your character gets to interact, your character gets to show their emotions. But it also, and for those of us who are more inclined to give focus than take focus, this might help. It might help you flip the switch so you're more willing to take focus. Is that when you take focus, you relieve pressure off the other players. And by that, I mean, if someone has to be on all the time, if someone has to lead every roleplay moment in every game, that's draining. That can be very exhausting. And if that's the case, it's almost as though, like, if everyone is like carrying like just backpacks of stuff, it's almost as though that one person carrying the roleplay load is being asked to carry everyone's backpack. And we don't want to do that. So when the moment calls for it, don't be afraid to take focus so that you can lighten the load for your fellow player. One of my favorite games that I played in so far, this was a flabbergasted game with level 1 geek. I was playing the role of Jeffrey or Joffrey. It was just such a fun game. But when I started, I was playing as in the role of like this butler for Felicia, her character Grace Farwell. And as I was the butler, I was more of like a support, assist. However, I started off that way, but of course, Flabbergasted is playing off of the kind of the old shows of like Jeeves and Wooster, where the butler ends up being the most capable. Now, I wasn't sure how I was gonna do this, but we finally got to a point where I broke off from the group to try to find a camera, and I was looking for someone else who worked at this party, someone else who was someone else who might see like, oh, we're on the same level, or maybe just one step or two away, as opposed to being one of the aristocracy. And in that moment, as I was interacting, as I was trying to get the objective, which was a camera, I was alone. And everyone else had really pulled their weight as far as like coming up with schemes, coming up with plans, interacting with the Duke. But my character was still very much like, oh, I'll follow orders. But once I broke off, once I needed that objective, I made a decision. And the decision was that Jeffrey will do anything for his lady. In which case, once my character went in, started talking with the cook, it became a moment where my character was able to start interacting and do his own thing. In which case, the cook, the vibes that my character, that I was getting, was that the cook is tired. The cook is neglected. Tired and neglected. In which case, For Jeffrey, Jeffrey does hold his position in high esteem, and he also wants the cook to hold her position in high esteem. But because he has an objective and he thinks she might be able to get it for him, then he lays on the charm. And utilizing the charm, he's able to effectively seduce his way into getting the information. Now, in that moment, it was definitely one of those one-on-one scenes where, because we're all separated, my character, laying on the charm, goes back and forth with the DM, and I had to take focus. I had to step up. But this gave everyone else time where they could think if they needed to come up with a plan. They could relax a little bit so that they don't have to use up all their mental energy in one go. They could take a breather. But also, it gives them a chance to laugh a little bit. Not to say that every time you take focus it has to be humorous, but when you do, you give the other players a chance to enjoy the game. I mean, playing is enjoying too, but you get a chance for them to be in the audience, just as you're in the audience when they have the focus. And then you can step up when you need to. But that's something that's very powerful that is done in wrestling, is simply the fact that when a character is speaking, when a character is laying into someone else with a promo, they're able to take focus, stand in center stage, spotlight on them, soak in the crowd, soak in the lights, and, well, rise up to the pressure that's on their shoulders. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is clarity of characters. And this is something that I would say, as far as any game is concerned, we want to have characters that are multidimensional. We want to have characters that have many facets about them. But we're not about to do like an exposition dump on everyone else. Even though we might want to. Like, we might have written several pages of backstory that we want to tell everyone. But you're not going to do it all in one session. You're not going to info load everyone right from the get-go. Because, well, info dumps, people don't retain this information. And I think of this as far as like exposition, or like if you're playing in a game, or if you're, let's say, just watching a movie. There are some movies where it becomes like a very clear exposition dump, and it's hard to retain when someone in the course of a minute tells you all of the history of this place, or tells you all of this person's thing. The exposition ends up being only partially absorbed, if at all. And it feels weird. It feels weird because it breaks the storytelling rule of show, don't tell. Because if your character has a tragic backstory, and this has influenced their life so significantly, and if you tell everyone immediately, then it doesn't have the same impact as if we're able to see that in maybe little vignettes or maybe it'll squeak out every now and then. Maybe we can see that in just the way the character behaves. Those little things are so much more impactful than if you were to tell everyone all of that. Now, I'm going to tie this back into having clear characters by simply saying if you have many dimensions to your character, then focus in on the ones that matter the most now. And by that, I mean, what is everyone going to see immediately? Maybe if, let's say your character, I'm gonna build one right now real fast. Let's say we have a heroic character. And this character, for first trait, wants to save everyone. I mean, that's fairly straightforward, right? I'm also gonna give them the trait of they failed to save the ones they cared before. And that's why they want to save everyone. Now I'm gonna add in of like, okay, impatient with, okay, hang on. Cuts to the chase, doesn't like small talk. Maybe because they failed to save the ones they cared about before, maybe that was because they were caught up in other things. And while they were caught up, they weren't able to do everything they needed to do. So they want things to be very economical. And maybe as far as like other elements, they really like alone time, building things. And maybe that alone time, building things, maybe that's what they used to do all the time. Because I don't know, their father taught them how to do it. And they've emphasized this because they miss their father. Maybe that was one of the people they failed to save. And I'm also going to add, let's say a random one. Romantically awkward. Because love interest unrequited. And maybe this was also because they weren't able to save everyone. Now, we have all these elements of this character's backstory. And with that, I'm not going to tell everyone all this in the beginning of this session. Sorry, I'm going to shift all these down a little bit so I have enough room. Because it'd be a little weird, right? If I tell everyone this, then it's hard to remember. It becomes more of a pitch. It's as though I'm pitching a character as opposed to showing you character. So, if, let's say it's the first session, and let's say in this first session, everyone is at a party. Session 1, party time. And in this case, the party is crashed. Crashed by a group of bandits who are trying to steal everything. In which case, let's say this is the initial thing. Right when everyone is about to get set, bandits crash and begin attacking, begin demanding everyone's gold, everyone's valuables, jewelry, all that jazz. In which case, when the DM leaves it to the players to say, hey, what do you want to do? In this case, my character here, let's call him Tom. Tom is going to run in and try to save people. From the jump, he's already had moments where he's failed because of delay, because something's, maybe hesitation, stopped him from acting quickly enough, in which case, when everything starts going down and bandits are brandishing their weapons, he'll see this and run and try to help people. He's going to try to help everyone. Maybe he'll start with the people who seem most in danger, the people who already have a knife at their throats. But he's rushing for it. His failures in the past are informing his actions in the present. And because of this may not be the most effective, efficient approach. But in this case, instead of me saying he's a hero who's rushing in to try to save everyone, him doing that immediately tells everyone, okay, he wants to save people and he's reckless. And that is the tale of this opening sequence. This character is trying to save people and he's being reckless, and there might be a moment afterwards, if the party survives, where people might confront him for being stupid. And in that moment, when their emotions are heated, when they're angry at Tom, that is when your character can say, if you want to, can say, I wasn't gonna let it happen again. And when you do that, because you've already done something stupid, because they've already seen you, you mean what you say, your character has this about them, and they're willing to risk their life for it. Then they want to know why. It's like, hey, why did you do that? I didn't want that to happen again. And there we have a powerful motivation, and this can pique the curiosity of your audience, whether you're doing a public game on stream, or, I mean, whenever you're playing, everyone around is a part of the audience too, including yourself. There are plenty of times where I've played a character where I'm like, oh shoot, my character is gonna do this, and that sucks for me. But because it makes sense for the character, it's like, all right, I'm gonna have to, it's like I'm along for the ride. I'm watching this unfold too. But we have this juicy line of, hey Joe, how are you? Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions or anything you would like to know as far as improv and D&D, please drop them in the comments and I will, or in the chat, and I will do my best to answer as quickly as I can. But with this line, we get to make a decision. And that decision is our character the type to tell people this? Because we have established something else earlier on, that this character cuts to the chase and doesn't like small talk. In which case, when people ask, what don't you want to happen again? You get to you get to if you're playing it this way. If you're playing it in such a way of like, I don't want to talk about things too long because that will delay action. Then you could be like, people died, and walk away. And you get to, I mean, play up more of that mystery, right? Because then that leaves a question in the heads of, hey, Matt Har, it's nice to see you. I appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate the support. But for this character, Tom, like the course of him saying, people died, walking away. It's very like the edgy kind of character, but we do have some level of investment, because if I just tell you this, as opposed to him acting all these moments by jumping into battle, jumping into the fray, and then being confronted, then it feels less powerful. But because we were able to show through action, through the other players and the other characters being invested in this character now, this becomes more captivating, right? So then, captivating because we showed instead of told. And now, maybe through the course of the campaign, we get to learn more about it. Maybe this character could change and reveal more over time. I'm so sorry, I'm gonna switch to the next song because lyrics throw my train of thought off so fast. But the character, through the course of the campaign, could change and reveal more about his past over time. But because we've already shown that level of, the other players have seen your character in action and have seen the fact that this character, in spite of him being so closed off, has the same sorts of goals, the noble goals in mind, then they'll want to see the development. You make people want your backstory rather than pushing it on them. Now, tying it back into professional wrestling, it's that I just had the one singular focus, right? In that moment, the character is focused in on saving people and is willing to be reckless doing so. In professional wrestling, if you look at the most iconic characters of all time, they generally speaking have one singular focus. They have a goal in mind. Many characters, their focus is on becoming champion. Some characters, as far as like becoming champion, it's like, why? They want to be the best. Or they know they're the best and they want to prove it. Know they're the best. And they want to prove it. And that's the thing, it's like, these characters, they may have other facets of their personality, but they're able to play up that one element first so that you're able to pull everyone in. So the audience and everyone around you immediately know what this character's about. And that allows them to get invested so you can reveal more later. And as far as like distinct characters go, I mean, one of the big things that WWE does, just professional wrestling in general does so well, is the idea of faces versus heels. They have very distinct, good, I say good and bad loosely, because there are some characters where it's like they are designed to be the bad guy, and they do the not so subtle things to make that clear. And there's also characters that are designed to be the good guy, and they do the things that, again, are fairly obvious, that make it clear so you know to root for them. And in D&D, the easiest way to do this is through like play with NPCs. Like that first bit was more so about playing as a player, but as a DM, if you're playing with NPCs and you've got a big bad evil guy, then sure, you might have a very elaborate story, a very captivating story about this evil figure with extensive backstory. But in spite of that, you need to focus in on one element at a time. If you make them sympathetic from jump, from the first moment, that can be hard for the players to decide to fight against this person, to take the quest to fight against this person. So, something you can do immediately is establish the evil first. Maybe the big bad evil goes and destroys a town. Or they go and kill an NPC that the players love. And once you do that, you immediately are able to strike at that emotion. And so then the players know, this is a bad dude. This is the person that we need to fight. This is the person that we need to take out. And that motivation, once they have that established in their head, then you can start feeding them other elements that might show off some of their reasoning. They might become, the big bad might become not like a sympathetic, but like at the very least at some level, the sort of like the sort of character that is like the tragic villain, if you want. Like the players might reach a point where they're like, we have to take them out, but it kind of sucks because with everything we found out through the course of this campaign, they were just unlucky. But you have to establish one thing at a time. Otherwise, there's too much information, and it's hard to decide. It's hard to remember everything. But on the same veins, you could have a nice, good NPC. And, I mean, players might be very suspicious about good or nice NPCs, especially if you make them super complex, super complicated. Let's say this NPC with extensive backstory. But again, I think of it kind of like exactly, Joe. Oh my gosh. Magneto is such a boss. Such a boss. But yeah, it's like if you have them encounter an NPC, I think of it just like meeting someone for the first time. Because when you meet someone for the first time, generally speaking, you just get one element of them. You just get the one thing. Maybe you meet them at a party. They're putting their best foot forward, and that's all you get. Whether they're funny, or they're charming, or whatever. You just get the one dimension. Because, I mean, when you're talking with someone, it's like meeting someone for the first time, that first impression. Very rarely do you connect with someone so much that you want to show more, right? People have to earn more information. because it's a little creepy if you don't, right? Like, let's say you're walking down the street and someone comes up to you. That's already anxiety inducing for me, at least. Someone just comes up to me, and then let's say they're just like, hey, I'm new around here. Do you know, like, is there a good place to eat? Then that's a little bit more calming, because then I could already be like, oh, they have some level of politeness. It doesn't look like they're going to like attack me or anything, or try to sell me something. They're just asking for information. Then I could be like, oh yeah, there's the place down the street with the fried potatoes. It's delicious. And then they could be, oh great, thank you very much, and then be on their way. But imagine if this person is like, oh, thank you very much. By the way, my name is Jenny, and like, I'm super into dogs. And I mean, at this point, based on everything I've said, it's been very short, to the point, because this is a stranger. But if they're suddenly volunteering way more information than I asked for, way more information than I like wanted, because we haven't connected on that level yet, it becomes suspicious, right? It becomes almost like someone dumping information, dumping a burden on me. So when you have them meet this good NPC, they get that one dimension, and maybe they'll encounter them again and learn something else about them. But when we keep it simple, then people will remember these characters better. So you might have an NPC who needs the player's help and is rich. Or we might have an NPC who needs the player's help and is very sad. Or we might have an NPC who needs the player's help and seems cool. Whatever it is, if we can distill it down into that one line, it's so much easier for the players to remember that one person, especially if you have a long session, if you have a lot you need to get through. Now, with that, we're going to start talking a little bit about the teamwork of professional wrestling. Because that level of teamwork, you need that when you're playing, when you're DMing in a game. Sorry, my playlist ran out. There we go. So, as far as the teamwork is concerned, we all know if you're at a party, teamwork amongst characters is important. But there are a lot of times where the mentality is, it's almost like the DM and the players are at odds. And it's understandable, because the DM controls the enemies. DM controls enemies, the monsters, the big bad evil. And so that line can become maybe too harsh. And at the end of the day, the DM and the players are not enemies. The DM controls the enemies and creates the enemies and creates bad things for the players. But the DM is not in direct it's not like a direct adversary of the players. And the way I connect this is that in wrestling, even though you have two characters who are yelling at each other, who are beating each other up, who are throwing each other into the ground and taking the other person's championship away, they're working together to tell this story. Two wrestlers working together to tell a story. And that is exactly like a DM and their players, because everyone at the table is working together to tell the story. And it's important to remember that, because when we are in that adversarial mode, it can be easy to suddenly be like, okay, I don't want to lose now, so as the DM, I'm going to throw creatures that they could never beat. But then we lose the plot. It becomes like, I think of it kind of like when you're a kid and you're playing make-believe, and then some kid gets too competitive about it, and they're like, you know what? All right, we've been doing this. I came up with something. And the one thing I came up with was this shield against being tagged. And when I have the shield up, no one can tag me. If you tag me, then you lose. Then it's like, well, all right, I guess we're not tagging you then. I guess you don't want to play then. You win, you outsmarted us, I guess, but they've lost the point. Much like if you're at a table, you don't want to... You're not trying to win at the cost of everyone else. Your focus is telling the story. And as the DM, you find ways to help challenge the players in this story, but you're not trying to win necessarily. And I do want to make the distinction that it's like your creatures are trying to kill the players, maybe, but you are not trying to kill the players. And it's important just to maintain that distinction. Just like in wrestling, it's like you could have two people who are feuding, who hate each other in the ring, who, like, based on what they're saying and what they're doing, it looks like they want to kill each other. But at the end of the day, when they're in the locker room, they're working together. And I'm going to finish with the concept of making everyone look good. And by that, there are many, many facets of this. But the biggest thing I want to focus on is the idea of selling. Because a key element of wrestling is the fact that, sure, it's scripted, and there are a lot of elements that are real too. Like someone falling from a great height. There may be some elements that are built to make it softened a little bit. But in spite of that, we're still giving them the reaction they deserve. And by that, as far as DMing is concerned, like, when you get hit in wrestling, when you get punched, you can see very, very easily if someone is really punching. If you're comparing like boxing and MMA versus professional wrestling, when someone is just throwing a wrestling punch, sometimes you see when it doesn't make contact if the two people are not very experienced. But in spite of that, the person receiving this punch is gonna act like they just got hit with a haymaker. Same as when they're getting slammed. They're going to play up the idea of that really hurt, even though there were likely lots of safety procedures that were followed, of like the person slamming them, helping them down, or someone going for the punch, like loosening up before the punch connects. Now, as far as selling in D&D is concerned, if your players say something that it's like they win, like they win this argument with your NPC, then your NPC doesn't have to like try to shake it off, try to pretend like it doesn't bother them, because that'd be losing. No, you get to react. Much like how wrestlers who no sell. If a wrestler is being punched, but they act like they didn't, there better be a really good reason for that. Maybe this is the big boss, but if someone is supposed to be selling and they don't react out of their own volition, no one likes working with them. And so as the DM, if your player just came up with a brilliant insult for your NPC, and your NPC should be hurt, then be hurt. Let the player enjoy the fact that they got that last word. Let the player relish in them doing something cool. And I want to add, like, you as the DM, you generally have access to virtually perfect information. I'll put a little asterisk by this, but most of the time, when you start a game off, your players are perfectly willing to show you their character sheets. If it's a matter of auditing or just so you have their backstory and stuff like that. But as the DM, you have all this information, and it's important to use this responsibly, because there are certain things that, like, from a strategy point of view, if you want to win, you can win. You might have a party that only has one type of damage or two types of damage, and then you can throw a creature at them that negates everything they can do, and then you win. But I mean, if you're just doing that just to win, then we've lost the plot. We want, every now and then, those challenges will come up, in which case the player characters will learn and adapt eventually, but you're not trying to hit them with this every time, because then that becomes no fun. And by contrast, I also want to add, like, if your players have something really cool but niche, then let them use it. And in this case, there's one example that comes to mind, a very specific example. It's a spell known as Heat Metal. Heat Metal, when it's good, it's so good. When it's not applicable, it's useless. Case in point, if you know a player has Heat Metal, and you had an encounter lined up with plenty of people with, like, plate armor, if we want to be, like, super competitive and petty to win, then we take away the armor. So then Heat Metal is nullified completely. But in this case, if they've taken Heat Metal, and let's say it's not like a wizard where they have a bunch of spells they can choose, but maybe like a sorcerer or warlock where they only have a limited selection, and they went out of their way to take this, and you had the encounter planned already with plate mail, then just walk forward with the plate mail. Because that player, when you describe the fact that they're wearing this really heavy, bulky, very defensive armor, you can see the light in their eyes as like maybe their allies are swinging and shooting and missing over and over again. But then they have the chance to use this spell that they've taken and they've been holding for just this moment. And they get to cast it. And they get to just roast this enemy. You get the chance to sell for them. You get the chance to keep that armor in that encounter that you'd already planned, but you keep that on so that this player will have the chance to show off their skills. Or rather, I should say, it's not that you're keeping it on, because you had it already, but it's that you're not taking it away. You're not trying to metagame away the player's cool things. Because, like I said, we're all telling this story together. And there are gonna be the times where you had something planned and the players have the perfect answer. And if you're being competitive, then you take it away. But I'd much rather see, in the course of the story, because the players, their characters are gonna be facing a lot of hardship and battle, sometimes you just want to see them win. Sometimes you just want to see a combat that they can just kick into a hole. Because, I mean, as far as they're concerned, they had the right plan. And it'd be petty to see what they had planned and use that to just dance and stunt on them because you have perfect information. So we've gone over just a little bit, but I want to thank y'all. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. You guys are amazing. Especially as I nerd out about wrestling and D&D and improv. I mean, today we talked about some skills you can take from professional wrestling, such as sharing focus, which includes both giving focus and being willing to take focus when it's necessary. Having clear, distinct characters where you're showing rather than telling, showing just one facet that the other players or the encounter has earned, so that everyone becomes more intrigued and captivated for more. And also as far as your big bad evil or a good NPC, showing just the one facet so it's very clear who they are, at least at first, and we can uncover more as we go. If we throw too much information out there, it can be overwhelming, hard to remember. And finally, teamwork, where though we control, as DMs, we control the creatures that are the enemies of the players, we are not the enemies of the players. We're all working together, much like two wrestlers in a wrestling match are working together to tell a story, to tell a compelling story. And as a part of that is, of course, selling properly, reacting properly, because as the DM, you typically have all the cards. And when you do, you have to ensure that you're not cheating the players out of the information that they've been so kind to give to you. So that when they happen to have a perfect answer, they get to celebrate a little bit. Because you know, and I know, as a DM, very rarely will they have a perfect answer. So, oh, thank you so much, Joe. You're amazing. I can't wait to be able to play with you again. Maybe DM for you. Fingers crossed. But we'll see how it goes. Thank you so much for tuning in. And, well, until next time, everybody. Take care.